As COVID-19 impacts every aspect of our work and life, we have seen 2 years' worth of digital transformation in 2 months.
Technology has helped keep us connected, even in isolation, and it has served as the engine for education, work, and critical healthcare tools in this global crisis.
Half of the world's population still lacks access to reliable, high-speed internet, and therefore everything that connectivity provides. We've seen the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbate the problem as people around the globe now rely on the internet more than ever.
The more people are connected, the more they are a part of the digital economy, the more access to information they have, the more politically stable you could imagine things. It's one of the reasons why the developed world has high political stability.
Imagine a world with no internet. For nearly half the population, that is a reality, and more than 1 billion people still lack the electricity needed to power connected devices.
It's more important than ever that people have access to the internet so that they can have access to the digital skills that are needed for the jobs of today and for the jobs of tomorrow.
The digital divide often leaves the most vulnerable behind and widens existing equality gaps. In nearly every region of the world, more men use the internet than women. And in the least developed countries, 80% of the population is offline.
Digital inclusion of the future will be one that equips people with the skills and the knowledge to know what types of skills they need to build so that they can access the opportunities of the future.
In the 21st century digital economy, and particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's more important than ever to have digital skills. It's the skills and ability to use digital devices and online networks and programs. There's just not enough people who are equipped with the digital skills needed for the jobs that are available. That's why Microsoft recently committed to helping 25 million people worldwide this year access digital skills for in-demand roles and certifications for those roles at a low cost.
Bridging the divide can also bolster economies, connecting populations to the next billion jobs, today.
When more people are connected, more people are empowered to improve their lives, the lives of their family members, and the lives of people in their community. We work to empower every person and every organisation on the planet to achieve more, and connectivity helps people and communities reach their full potential.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sherrell Dorsey. I am the founder and CEO of The Plug, a tech news platform covering inclusive innovation. And welcome to Activating Skills for the Next Billion Jobs, a GZERO media live stream in partnership with Microsoft and Eurasia Group. Now, over the course of the next hour, we'll talk about a few key things: digital inclusion and getting more people online and connected globally, the impact of the pandemic on connectivity, and teaching the skills required to bring more people into 21st century jobs at a time when both skilled workers and good jobs are needed. So to start us off, I'm joined by Kate Behncken, Vice President and Lead of Microsoft Philanthropies, and Rohitesh Dhawan, Managing Director of Energy, Climate, and Resources at Eurasia Group. So Kate, let's begin by setting the stage for the audience. We heard Satya Nadella at the start of the video saying that 2 years of digital transformation happened in just the first 2 months of the pandemic. Can you explain what this means?
Yes. It's really been incredible. It seems like overnight COVID upended almost every aspect of people's lives, from how we connect with our friends and families, how we work, whether we work, how our teachers are teaching, how our kids are learning. And the rapid digital transformation has been driven by the rapid demand from businesses who suddenly needed to operate remotely, and from governments who need to provide their services remotely, and schools that had to quickly move to online learning. And this rapid acceleration presents both challenges and opportunities. And it's really critical that everyone has access to connectivity and digital skills needed to participate in the digital economy. Every job, or almost every job, requires some level of digital skills or digital fluency, even if it's not a tech job. And we're likely to be in this hybrid environment for some time. And so employers are going to be looking for people who have the digital skills to manage remote work and for these new jobs. The The digital divide is not new, and of course the focus on digital skills is obviously not new. It's been an area of focus for so many people for a long time. But COVID has really exacerbated the issue. It shined a really harsh light on what was already a widening skills gap around the world. So it's essential that people get connectivity and digital skills to help respond to this rapid digital transformation.
Thank you, Kate. Very, very insightful. Ro, I want to come to you and just ask, from a geopolitical perspective, what impact has this sudden increase in need for connectivity, from everything from work to education to healthcare and many of the things that Kate mentioned? What does this have on societies?
Sherrell, quite simply, geopolitically, what this does is, for many parts of the world, it turns their strengths into weaknesses. Now, what I mean by that is, in societies where a lot of things are done high contact, if you can't do those anymore, you're hamstrung in how life works. So when you plot, for instance, the countries that have the types of jobs that can be moved to teleworking, and whether people in those countries can access those jobs, and you plot that against per capita GDP, which is a measure of national wealth, you find a group of countries that rank low on both. And it's in places like that where this need to be online, coupled with the inability to be online, creates the most geopolitically significant consequences. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about countries like Peru, Mexico, Turkey, South Africa, where pre-COVID, they would have regarded several of their sectors like tourism as real strengths and bedrocks of society. But given the changes we're living through with COVID, suddenly those things that were strengths can become weaknesses. And, many of these countries, Sherrell, also happen to be places where there are lots of young people. And remember, not so long ago, we were talking about a young population as a good thing, as a demographic dividend. But we know across the world that young people are the most hit when it comes to the ability to telework. So when everything moves online, and you have lots of young people that can't participate in that new economy, it creates this sense of instability both within countries, and as a result, it spills over into the geopolitical landscape.
Absolutely. Ro, thank you for addressing those and giving more context to some of these vulnerabilities that we are up against on a global scale. Among the things that we're going to discuss today is how connectivity, or lack thereof, as Ro and both Kate have mentioned, can exacerbate inequality among already at-risk populations and people. So I want to share a bit of a recent conversation that Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, had with Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the former president of Chile. Let's take a listen.
One of the things that COVID has reminded us of is the degree to which we're reliant on technology today. I mean, literally, people have been able to go to school or not sometimes based on whether they had an internet connection. And it just causes me to wonder, how do we think about the evolution of human rights? When the Universal Declaration was written, no one had heard of the word internet. How do you think about access to the internet? How do you think about access to broadband? Should we be thinking of these as part of human rights today?
I completely think so. It's part of the SDGs, to ensure access to internet for all. And I think it's so essential because we knew that they're part of the world where there's no access to internet, no access to digital technology, they're not illuminated. But on the other hand, it makes a whole difference. And I was mentioning before that from the 1.6 billion learners, students, almost 500 million don't have access. For them, it's clearly a big loss. So it's a big concern that we could have a loss of a generation in some countries. And we saw with Ebola that it's very difficult. Children lose school. I mean, in 160 countries, they have to close the schools. Many times they don't go back to school because they start working in the rural area with the family. So I think it's crucial that we ensure that access to internet, it's like it's a human right. I don't know, we don't need necessarily to write again the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because we say that same things should be ensured online and offline. So yes, but I think it's really a human right, and we have seen the differences between and how much the digital divide can mean in terms of the future for young children.
So Michelle highlighted some very stark statistics here and pinpointed this idea that there could be an entire lost generation as a result of the disconnectivity that this pandemic has accelerated. Ro, let's get your take on her assertion that connectivity is a human rights issue. What are your thoughts here?
So Sherrell, and both Michelle and Kate really gave us a human-centric view of the impact of this pandemic, which I think is so important to keep in the front of our minds. You know, on the question of whether internet access is a human rights issue, I know it's steeped in some really important legal questions, which I'm going to stay clear of because I'm not qualified on the legal side, and this is really also a legal question. But something Michelle said really struck me, which is about the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the 17 goals that the world has signed up for to achieve by 2030 to give everybody a decent life. And it's clear to all of us, we can feel it intuitively, that without access to the internet, it's very hard to give people the opportunity to lead decent lives. So if I look down that list of 17 SDGs, whether it's SDG 1 on poverty, or it's about inequality, or it's about decent work, in all cases, you can see the criticality of digital inclusion to achieving those SDGs. And so one way this can become real for us all, Sherrell, is if you think about how digital connectivity plays out in real life for all of us. You know, I'm sitting here in the UK at the moment, and even here in the UK, costs of broadband are prohibitive for some portion of the population, which may be difficult for people to believe given the UK is such a rich country. But when you dig a bit deeper, if I look at the bill I receive for the broadband that I pay, it's got a VAT rate, a value-added tax rate of 20%, which is the same as on any luxury good. So one step to thinking about the internet as a basic right or a human right would be to take that rate of value-added tax down to what we pay on other essential utilities, what I pay for gas or electricity, which is 5%. Those would be the kinds of things, Sherrell, that I think get us further to the vision that we heard in the video, which is to give everyone access to what is quickly becoming an essential part of participating in the economy.
Thank you, Ro. Very, very well said. Kate, I want to get you to chime in here. At one point, at the height of the pandemic in April, roughly 90% of schools worldwide closed their doors. And what is your take on this, the impact that has on those who are lacking connectivity? Even here in the US, you know, families and students who are lacking devices like laptops, smart tablets at home. What does that impact look like long term?
Well, I think there's so much anxiety about the impact that COVID is having on long-term student outcomes. It is incredibly difficult for students to participate in remote education, let alone thrive, if they don't have access to the internet or they don't have access to a device. And of the 90% of schools that closed worldwide, many of those have reopened, but they've reopened online or they've reopened in a hybrid model. And the problem is many schools were not equipped with the IT infrastructure or the tools to actually manage remote education effectively. Teachers weren't experienced in teaching remotely, let alone the fact, as we've been talking about, that 40% of students don't have access to the internet. And in the US alone, there was a 2019 study that showed that 46% of school children don't have access to a device. And these were pre-COVID estimates. So to ensure better outcomes for students, it's critical that we help schools get the IT infrastructure needed, both to continue remote education, but also improve remote education. We need to help teachers get the training to use the technology and the tools to teach remotely effectively. We need to ensure that students and households get connected to the internet, and students need access to devices. One of the one of the ways that Microsoft has been helping disconnected students around the world to continue their education during COVID is through a great partnership that we have with UNICEF for an online learning platform called Learning Passport. And this was originally focused on the 30 million young people around the world that are on the move in crisis-affected communities, so refugees and displaced people. And the idea was that if they were on the move, then education should be on the move with them. And when COVID hit, we expanded this program so that countries with a digital curriculum could facilitate online learning for students, leveraging that Learning Passport platform with devices at home. So I think stakeholders really need to help equip schools, help teachers get training to teach remotely, and then help students get access to broadband and devices.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you for also sharing more of Microsoft's involvement in helping us to create solutions in this space. So to continue our conversation, I want to bring in Dominique Hyde, who serves as the Director of External Relations at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Dominique, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Dominique, let's talk about populations on the move. Kate actually referred to this in our last conversation. So at the end of 2019, just before the pandemic, there were nearly 80 million displaced people worldwide, 26 million of whom were refugees. And when it comes to the connectivity issue we are discussing, what was the specific situation for refugees prior to the pandemic?
The situation for refugees prior to the pandemic was already dire, and the pandemic has only exacerbated. Unfortunately, the pandemic hasn't stopped conflict, hasn't stopped wars, hasn't stopped persecution. So the people that are refugees and displaced that you mentioned continue to be the ones that are suffering the most. And if we're looking right now at the impact of COVID-19 on those displaced, it's exacerbated by the fact that they don't have access to the digital economy, which was key before COVID and is even more so now. It's basically a lifeline for them. And so what we're seeing now is an exclusion from the digital economy and the impact that's having, and we've heard it from the other panelists before me, is the impact on schooling, on education, on healthcare, on lack of access to the work or job markets, and that's also impacting refugees and those displaced. And if you look at access to information, these are all essential services for refugees. And as the pandemic hits, their access becomes even more limited and more damaging to them. The inequalities in access to technology and connectivity are just exacerbated. So what we do know is that refugees are the ones, and those that are forcibly displaced are the ones that are least likely to have access to technology in the world in general. It puts them at a huge disadvantage, and they're already hugely disadvantaged. And so I think one of the things that we've been hearing, that we know from UN Women, for example, is that even before the pandemic, in low and middle income countries, men had 1.4 more chances of having access to a mobile device than women. And so what does that mean? What does this lack of access to a phone mean for a woman, especially in a situation where a woman is suffering domestic violence? And we've seen that exacerbated with the COVID pandemic, is that it's the difference between life or death, this access to a phone. What it means is that they don't have access to instant messaging, which sometimes has geolocation capacity, free calls to hotlines. These are all solutions that we need to be looking at. They must be both high tech as well as low tech. And we just can't assume that people are online, especially refugees and those displaced. So what have we been doing as UNHCR? We've been looking at digital literacy for girls and women, in terms of access, in terms of knowledge, in terms of training, but even simply the confidence of actually using these tools when they're actually getting them. And just a few examples in Mauritania. We've strengthened the digital skills and trained refugee women and youth to lead ICT or technology workshops to drive change in the community. And in Mauritania, sorry, did you want to come in?
Sorry, please finish. Please finish.
Okay.
And I'm going to cut over to Kate. But thank you. No, this is great.
Okay, no, sorry. I was hearing some background noise. And so in Mauritania, where the refugees are in some of the most far-flung places, with Malian refugees going into Mauritania. I mean, you're talking the access to the internet and digital access is just it's what actually saves them in many cases. In Malawi, there's a refugee camp which is mostly Burundians, and a Burundian refugee came up and decided to create a coding school. So also refugees can be people that find solutions. And so he created this coding school to build the tech skills for refugees and the host communities. And so with Microsoft for Africa, we worked together to actually get them access to Wi-Fi with the support of the local internet provider, as well as 1,000 smartphones, about 10 tablets, 40 laptops. It maybe doesn't seem like much, but this changes people's lives. It helped students have hope, reach their full potential. And these are just two examples, but so much more can be done if we work in partnership and have key alliances with partners like the ones on the panel today and beyond.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dominique. Kate, I want to bring you back in here pretty quickly here, and just to some of Dominique's points and the partnership she mentioned with Microsoft, particularly around device distribution and connectivity. Can you quickly share just a bit more about ways that connectivity and skilling will really be a direct benefit to refugees and the communities who welcome them?
Yeah, I mean, millions of refugee children and young people are missing out on what is a fundamental human right, and that's the right to a quality education. And investing in quality education is the most sustainable pathway from a person's dependency on humanitarian aid to self-reliance. As Dominique said, connectivity and skilling is really a lifeline, and it empowers refugees to provide for themselves, to provide for their families, and also contribute to the development of their communities. And we've all heard this term that talent is everywhere and opportunity is not. But how do we change this? There's so much talent in refugee communities. These communities are often huge, like small cities. So how can we unlock this talent? Digital inclusion anchors a lot of the work that we do in Microsoft Philanthropies. And we believe that every person in every community should have access to the digital skills to secure a livelihood. And we work with our partners around the world to take that work forward. And so, as an example, with UNHCR, we're working to bring digital skills and computer science education to a refugee camp in Kakuma in Kenya. And our goal there is to include 50% women. As Dominique was saying, there's women and girls are often more impacted and they're more at risk of being left behind. And that's an example of where we've had to evolve our work to a hybrid model to support greater online learning, which is obviously so important in this COVID world. We also support organisations like Ready in Germany, which is a fantastic organisation, and they have extensive experience in equipping recent refugees to Germany with the skills needed to gain employment. So we can help empower refugees and unlock talent in their communities with a focus on connectivity and skilling.
Thank you so much, Kate. And so before this live stream, we asked our audience on Twitter for their thoughts on some of the big questions we're tackling in our conversations today. And one of them that was posed was, should we prioritize to close the digital inclusion gap in a in a post-pandemic world, specifically what we should prioritize to close that gap. And the choices were internet access for all, digital skills training, making tech cheaper, and equitable access to digital devices. As we see here, the large majority did say that internet access for all should be a top priority. And so Kate, Ro, and Dominique, I'd love to get you all helping to discuss these results. Let's unpack some of these priorities. Dominique, in what ways could greater access to devices like smartphones particularly help women in developing nations?
So first and foremost, the access to smartphones, what it does is that it provides safety. If you're looking specifically at women and girls, just having a smartphone, it gives a sense of safety. It also, very simply, gives you financial independence that you need. And if I've talked about domestic abuse and gender abuse as being one reason for having a smartphone and being able to reach somebody to get help immediately. We've seen the numbers of gender-based violence increase during this time. Having a phone can also help women in terms of their businesses and their entrepreneurial services and livelihood opportunities that they're creating. But also it gives agency to women in making their own economic decisions. So what you're seeing also with the pandemic is that we're going away from the usual cash services and using digital smartphones to actually also pay. And that's very much the case, as was mentioned by Kate, in Kenya. And so if you don't have that phone, you don't have access to cash, you don't have access to health services. And so I think that's what we're finding in general, is that the more smartphones, the more devices, the more women and girls feel secure, especially for women and children on the move. And as you're seeing women and children also moving from one country to another, in order to get access of what's happening on the other border in terms of smugglers, in terms of trafficking, the smartphones are essential.
Thank you so much, Dominique. And Kate, along that line of thinking, also we're looking at this skills training and how connectivity go hand in hand. And so how important is it to move both along concurrently? How do we actually accomplish this?
It's critical, and I think in some ways it's a little chicken and egg. Without access to broadband connectivity, you can't unlock digital skills, and without digital skills, you can't unlock the potential offered by connectivity. I think we all agree that access to broadband is critical, and it's really like the electricity of the 21st century, and yet half of the world's population can't access it. Here in the United States, at least 25 million people don't have access to broadband, and 3/4 of those people live in rural communities. One thing we're doing, we have an airband initiative helping to close that gap. And so in the US, we aim to bring broadband connectivity to 3 million people in these rural communities by July 2022. And outside of the US, we aim to extend broadband access to 40 million people around the world. And we do that with direct investments and partnerships with internet service providers, but also partnerships with learning partners to help people get the digital skills to be able to leverage that new connection. It's not just about providing connectivity. We've also got to help people get the skills to leverage that connectivity, whether it's for education or work or telehealth. Microsoft recently launched a global skills initiative to help 25 million people get the skills needed for in-demand roles so that we can help drive towards an inclusive economic recovery. But without a proper broadband connection, people can't run a business online. They can't access telemedicine, they can't take an online class, and students can't participate in remote education. So there needs to be a focus on skills training and connectivity in order to help bridge the digital divide and ensure that we're really going after an equitable economic recovery.
Thank you, Kate. Dominique, Hyde, I want to thank you for joining us today. We really greatly appreciate your comments as well as your insights today. So now we're going to shift focus to dive deeper into the skilling part of this conversation, really drawing on some of the insight here that Kate provided and getting people the access and training they need to be successful in the jobs of today and tomorrow. So Kate, Behncken, and Rohitesh Dhawan are still with us. Let's bring in two additional panelists. Lisa Lewin is the CEO of General Assembly, an organization that transforms careers through education and skilling. And Parag Mehta is Executive Director and Senior Vice President of the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. Welcome.
Thank you, Sherrell.
Thank you.
Great to have you both. Parag, let's take this conversation out of the abstract and really into the practical. The supply and demand around jobs and available workers. What's the reality of this gap between those? Where are those jobs? Where are the greatest needs for skilled workers?
Yeah, Sherrell, at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of the emphasis was on three big industries: logistics, healthcare, and agriculture. As the pandemic has gone on, we've seen healthcare continues to be a really important industry for job placement, but it's also been accompanied by needs in the tech space and customer service and sales. And so I think the conversation you just had about digital skills and digital literacy is directly relevant to it, but we can't talk about this only in terms of skills, because skills is just one leg of the stool. We also have to talk about the need for opportunity and then the need for good quality jobs. So in the last segment, you talked about opportunity in terms of the gender inequality. In the US, we have looked at this from the lens of racial and economic justice. And how do we make sure that the way that we're feeding people into better jobs is equitable? There are 30 million Americans right now who have the skills to be in jobs that pay 70% higher than what they're making. But oftentimes the barriers to opportunity may not be direct discrimination, but it's in the ways that we promote jobs. It's in the ways that we advertise them. Why do we put requirements for bachelor's degrees when that isn't necessarily relevant to the job? And finally, the third leg of the stool is the jobs themselves. One of the challenges we're really having to deal with right now is that there just aren't enough jobs for the number of people who are unemployed. You know, during the Great Depression, the federal government stepped up and said, we will create 8 million jobs for people who are currently displaced or furloughed. But in this situation, I think one of the places we can look is empowering small and micro businesses. And this is something that we at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth have been doing for several years, which is working globally to empower micro and small businesses to become revenue creators and job creators. We believe that if you invest in the digitization of small businesses, it makes them more productive, more efficient, more profitable, and that leads to better jobs.
Parag, I love that you brought in the conversation on micro-entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship as another way for us to get this idea of future of work and connectivity as part of the conversation on how we put people back to work. And Lisa, I want to jump in with you here. Let's talk about reskilling, really retraining an available workforce to meet some of these demands. Where do we begin? How is this going to get accomplished?
Sure. So we work with a lot of enterprises who actually have the opposite problem of what's being described, which is they have the jobs. What they're missing are people with the digital skills to fill those jobs. And so when employers come to us to talk about their needs and their goals for workforce reskilling, they're often asking us about the training itself. When should they consider reskilling initiatives? What content or curriculum should they focus on? What's the investment and payback horizon, and so on? And, those are important questions because workforce reskilling is like any other strategic business initiative. It should be thoughtfully planned and executed and the outcomes tracked. But from our perspective, successful learning and successful reskilling really begins with a certain mindset. And the right mindset is one that recognizes the value of workers and the importance of investing in their continuous learning, not just as a path to short-term economic benefits for the business, although it can certainly deliver those, but really as a way of keeping the entire organization relevant, competitive, and attractive to talent over the long haul.
And that kind of perspective really has to come from the very, very top. When employees, when job seekers see that a company's leadership is deeply committed to this kind of learning and development, and they see how those programs are connected to an organization's broader mission and strategy, they're far more likely to participate, and those programs are far more likely to be successful.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Kate, I want you to jump in with your thoughts here and specifically sharing what Microsoft is doing in this area of reskilling.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying there's almost no industry that hasn't been impacted in some way by digital transformation, and almost no job that doesn't require some level of digital literacy. And while every job will be a digital job in some form or another, we also know that technology jobs, regardless of which sector, will continue to grow in demand. So while the global unemployment in 2020 might reach a staggering number of 250 million people, if industries digitally transform at the maximum rate, we believe that the labour market can absorb potentially 150 million new tech roles by 2025. So roles in data, cloud, cybersecurity, software development. And these new tech roles will require new skills. And as I noted earlier, we recently launched a new global skills initiative, and that leveraged three components. We worked with LinkedIn, and so it's using data. We have a real opportunity to use data in new ways to identify in-demand roles and the skills needed to fill them. We provided free access to content and curriculum and to the learning paths that people need to get the skills for those roles. And we provided low-cost certifications and job-seeking tools so that the people that are getting the skills can also connect to the new jobs. And we partner with organisations like General Assembly or Adecco to provide the training and also provide that last mile to employment and that critical last mile connection to jobs. And I think this same framework could be used by all of us in partnership as we work to reskill people for economic recovery. It's using the data to determine what in-demand roles are and providing people with access to content and also a methodology for people to certify and also signal their learning and credentials for employers that are hiring.
Thank you, Kate. I love the last mile to employment and what this idea around certification and low-cost skills training provides as we think about democratizing access to training and opportunities. Now I want to play for you part of a recent conversation with Doreen Bogdan-Martin of the International Telecommunications Union, who's talking about the role of both public and private entities in this issue. Let's watch.
One would think that this is a matter for the government to address, but what's your view on this? What do you think, and what would be the roles of the governments on the one hand, the business, and also civil society in addressing this issue of internet connectivity, in trying to bridge the gap that you have mentioned previously?
Well, I would say first, we need to remember that the gap is not just a technology gap. So it's not just about giving someone a connection. It's about everything that comes with it. And so if you try to empower someone by giving them connectivity, if they don't have the necessary skills, that connectivity is almost meaningless. So just to add, I mean, the importance of digital skills has to be stressed. Now, in terms of roles, I think when we look at the digital divide and the fact that today estimates show that if we want to close the gap by 2030, the deadline for the 2030 agenda, we need $428 billion. And that's just for the connectivity. So we need a huge amount of investment. We need a huge amount of creativity. We need new business models. It's not going to be the governments alone that can do this. We need the governments to set the enabling frameworks to attract the needed investments. We need the business interests, the private sector to come forward, and we need civil society. We need local communities. We need them to help us in crafting the best policies and ensuring that what's put out there actually responds to the needs of the local communities. I think we're at this kind of critical moment for connectivity where the understanding is finally there. The excitement about the potential is finally there, but we need to get it right. So that sort of digital transformation that's needed at the government level and that holistic view is going to be absolutely critical.
So Kate and Parag, I want to get your reactions to this notion that Doreen brought up, very kind of in a call to action framework, that private sector involvement in this issue is going to be critical. And I want to know from you both what role your companies can play and how they can move symbiotically with governments. So Ro, let's start with you. This idea of inclusive multilateralism is the theme this year on many major societal issues, right? So what does private-public cooperation look like on a global scale?
You know, Sherrell, this idea of multilateralism and one that's inclusive is a way of saying that there needs to be a broad tent that captures everyone who has something to contribute to solving a problem. As a political analyst, I have to say that notion is more idealistic than realistic given the state of the world as we are today. You know, what we're seeing, of course, is that in many cases, it's governments versus the private sector on several issues, particularly on technology, given how politicized it's become. So I think there are actually two forces at work here, one that makes it easier for people to come together on this issue, and one that makes it harder. So the thing that makes it harder is the fact that technology is now so heavily politicized. We're seeing that between the US and China, of course, but also other countries that are essentially going to have to choose which one of those two systems they're going to align themselves with. That adds a layer of complexity in the way that companies do what they do, but also in how they interact with governments. But the thing that perhaps makes it easier is a counterforce, which is that the result of COVID has been the return of government-led industrial policy in major economies. You know, for the last 2 or 3 decades, we didn't really see governments in large economies like the European Union or the US take an active role in setting industrial policy in the sectors to focus on and actually in supporting particular companies in those sectors. But the result of COVID and how strategically important sectors have become, particularly technology, means that we are seeing governments play that role now. So potentially there lies an opportunity with this return of state-led industrial policy to find ways to make things happen in this multi-stakeholder way that you described. Now, just to make that concrete, Sherrell, I would just say, you know, as we think about where all the money we're putting in from stimulus is going to go, there's some really interesting data to pay attention to. This shows that when governments invest in infrastructure that's traditional, so bricks and mortar stuff, you know, for every $1 million that's put into infrastructure, governments tend to create somewhere between 2 and 8 jobs. But if that money goes towards digital infrastructure, it appears that far more jobs are created, somewhere between 5 and 15 jobs. So, you know, that sort of insight can be used to try and channel the recovery money into ways that can create digitally enabled jobs. But I've got to say that this idea of multilateralism that's inclusive is a wonderful concept, but it's got plenty of headwinds against it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ro. And Kate and Parag, I do apologize. I want to jump back to the original question, reacting to the relationship or the potential for a symbiotic relationship between governments. Kate, maybe you can respond first in terms of what role Microsoft can play in this private sector involvement in these issues.
I mentioned our Airband initiative earlier, and there we're focused on bringing broadband access to rural communities in the US and also communities outside the US. And we do that by extending existing partnerships and also forging new relationships with internet service providers. And we focus on partnering with ISPs, but also investing in digital skills training for people in these newly connected communities. As Doreen just said, skilling is so important, and connectivity can be meaningless if people don't know how to leverage that connectivity. We're not trying to connect every person or become an ISP. We're hoping to create a blueprint that others will follow, and perhaps this can help stimulate international investment to close the gap. Governments can and need to create the enabling framework to attract investments, and civil society can ensure that needs to ensure that digital technologies and digital services actually address the needs of the local populations. But lasting economic recovery will require government policies that enhance connectivity.
And Parag, I want to jump back to you to get your reactions and your thoughts as well, and particularly how Mastercard and your work can also play this role in relationship with private sector and governments.
Yeah, thanks, Sherrell. I think it's kind of, I'm going to pick up where Kate left off. It's this collaborative effort among sectors, right? Because when my first example, I talked about the Great Depression and the role of the federal government in helping to create jobs. I was in the Obama administration during the Great Recession, working in the Labor Department, and I saw billions of dollars in federal grants going to community colleges to try and provide training to workers who had either been displaced by the economic recession or who had been displaced by trade agreements. And that was effective, but it wasn't the whole pie. Where we need to go now, and where Mastercard is focusing our energy, is on bringing all of these sectors together. How do we get the governments, the private sector companies, and the academic institutions and the training providers together on one platform so that you have a seamless experience as a worker who is trying to move from the job you have today to the job you need to get to? And in this space, I think there's a couple of things we can do. The first is looking in our own backyard. Change begins at home. And at Mastercard, we decided a couple of years ago to focus on in-house, on-the-job retraining and upskilling for our technology workers to make sure that they are prepared for the skills that they will need to do the jobs as they evolve into the future. But then the second thing is really looking at where the gaps are. So we recently partnered with historically Black colleges and universities to create curricula that would train people in the skills that we need: cybersecurity, data science, software engineering skills that we need that are particular to our company. But remember, once those people get the training and they come work at Mastercard, then they grow and they become terrific candidates to work in other places. So we're building the field. And then the last place I'd talk about is data science. It's been mentioned a couple of times here, but I really think there's an important role for the private sector to play in using our data scientists, and our data analytics in order to help governments and nonprofit organizations and training providers seize the opportunity, help create the pathways to better jobs, and then provide the coaching and the navigation services, because that's really what workers need. If you're a worker who lost your job, you don't want to spend a lot of time looking at data analytics to figure out what industries are hiring. You just want to know, what skills do I have? Where are they best suited towards? And how do I get to that job that needs those skills? The platforms that are being created right now by organizations like Bayes Impact in France, by the New Jersey Future of Work Accelerator, by Opportunity at Work, these are digital platforms that will get workers on that pathway to better jobs. And the private sector should be supporting those.
Thank you so much, Parag. And Lisa, I want to quickly cut to you. How do we connect people in need of training to these programs that can teach them these skills, particularly what Parag mentioned, data science, cybersecurity, all of these jobs that are in demand? And how do we make sure that it's accessible for these potential future workers?
From the beginning, it's been General Assembly's mission to deliver the programs that give people precisely these skills that they need to be employable and career resilient, particularly in moments like this. And a big part of that, as you just said, is ensuring accessibility. We all need to be doing our part to ensure that people from all walks of life have access to the kinds of education and reskilling programs that lead to promising futures and those resilient careers. So, for our part, we're launching free online programs, introductory classes that cover these topics: coding, data science, digital marketing, as well as general career development that allow people to explore the kind of tech skills that will keep them in demand. And in addition, through our cross-sector social impact initiatives, we've teamed up with nonprofits, with government partners, with workforce development agencies to provide free training to thousands of adults from underserved and overlooked communities. And it's just one of the reasons why we get excited about our partnership with Microsoft, for example, which started with a commitment to increase the AI capabilities for incumbent workers, but has now expanded to support individuals who've lost their jobs due to COVID. We're already running these programs in places like Louisville and Atlanta, and more to come in other U.S. cities. And so, despite this period of uncertainty, we think it's even more important that we all focus on removing those barriers to access.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So it's time for another viewer poll on this very topic. So we asked the audience, who's primarily responsible for teaching workers the digital skills to succeed in the 21st century? The choices were governments, businesses, nonprofits, or all working together. And overwhelmingly, people did indicate that all working together was truly going to be the solution here. And so let's discuss. Lisa, just cutting back to you here, what advice do you have for anyone watching who does have connectivity but's really looking for the kind of training that can lead them to a better job?
Sure. Well, we certainly support this idea that the responsibility is all of us working together. But individuals can certainly do their part as well. We can all incorporate practical learning into our own routines as a way of keeping our skills fresh and transferable. Honestly, there have never been more opportunities for casual and regular learning, especially online, where we can consume industry news, videos, webinars, short courses, all of which can help someone become more competitive in the marketplace and in their respective field. And so with that said, this isn't something that any one education or training provider can do alone. So that's why, as we mentioned before, we still have this deep commitment to partnerships that bring the best of the public, private, and social sectors together, because we believe by bringing together the expertise and capabilities of the private sector, of the workforce system, community colleges, traditional higher education, the business community, truly all of us working together, we can really tackle this immense challenge, particularly given that serious access opportunity and equity gaps continue to persist and have only become more exacerbated by this pandemic.
Thank you, Lisa, for your thoughts and for your insights, as well as Parag. We are really grateful that you both were able to join us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sherrell.
Thank you.
Great. So in our remaining minutes, I want to get some final thoughts from both Kate and Ro on the road ahead. Rahm Emanuel famously said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." I can't tell you how many times I have heard this repeated in business and as well in the social entrepreneurship space. So we're in a moment of global crisis, but we are also in a moment of great opportunity. Kate, how can this moment of rebuilding amid a pandemic potentially lead to both increased connectivity globally, but also this idea that we've been speaking about on reskilling of a much needed workforce?
Well, one thing is for sure, and that is this global pandemic has affected everyone in some way and in very, very different ways. And it's affected stakeholders as well. And so if there is a silver lining, it is perhaps the collective urgency between the stakeholders to address it and to rebuild the economy. We've talked about unemployment is soaring, and so skilling and reskilling is top of mind for many governments. The private sector is impacted, and we've talked about the need to reskill employees for remote work and for new jobs. And tech companies like Microsoft are leaning in even more, feeling the responsibility to help ensure that everybody has access to the digital skills needed. And of course, civil society, nonprofits and NGOs are needing to serve more beneficiaries than ever before. The collective urgency that everyone is feeling has, I think, led to increased collaboration and partnerships and more appetite to partner in new ways. And this collaboration is essential. These issues, as we've talked about, are just too massive for any company or one government or one industry to tackle alone. And actually, I think it was Mastercard that has said before, and I love this, and it's so true, that if you want to go wide, go with government. If you want to go deep, go with NGOs and academic institutions. And if you want to go fast, go with private sector. And if you want to go far, you must go together. And I think we can all agree that we have a very long road to an inclusive recovery. And so it's essential that we all go together. We're more focused than ever on where we can bring the greatest value, where Microsoft can bring the greatest value to help communities rebuild. And as we think about what role Microsoft Philanthropies can uniquely play in this effort, it's how we work with nonprofits and NGOs to build their digital capacity and digital innovation to help those organisations leverage technology and scale the work they do and reach more of the beneficiaries that they're trying to serve. We can also bring our digital skills and digital inclusion initiatives, and we can also play the role as a convener, bringing others to the table to help address these issues.
Thank you so much, Kate. Ro, the general consensus has been that global cooperation is sorely lacking in response to this crisis. How does that turn around? And this issue that we've been discussing in terms of digital inclusion, one that can see cooperation on a meaningful scale.
Well, Sherrell, it has to be said that global cooperation was lacking even before the crisis. And as we've seen in many areas, the crisis has just exacerbated that and thrown up what was really happening, which in our opinion was a low water mark in the state of global cooperation across several issues. And, Sherrell, I think the interesting thing is when you think about the impact of the pandemic on jobs and how, as a globe, we've responded, it throws up a really interesting insight as to what's going on. Because when you tally up the amount of money that rich countries have spent on stimulus relative to the number of jobs that have been lost in those economies, and you tally up the same amount of the money that low and lower middle income countries have spent relative to the job losses they've experienced, essentially what you find is that in lower and lower middle income countries, there's about $1 trillion gap between what they've spent and what they really ought to be spending relative to the job losses. Now, that $1 trillion is a big amount of money, but actually in the context of what we're spending globally and rich countries are spending is actually not very much. But the state of the world is such that any possibility that you would see global coordination leading to a transfer of wealth that would allow this gap to be closed in low and lower middle income countries, it's really hard to imagine that happening at the moment. So if I was to think, Parag talked about the Great Depression, but if you think about the Marshall Plan, for example, if you had a Marshall Plan equivalent today that led to that kind of wealth transfer, we'd be in a very different place. But the conditions for that just aren't there geopolitically. But let me describe one other global development that perhaps may be a sign of hope for where we can make progress on these issues. And that's on this very important question of the vaccines for the disease. It's not just a tech issue, but generally a healthcare issue. And here, what we've seen in the last few months is 170 countries come together in this new facility called COVAX, which ensures that there will be some level of vaccine distribution to everybody before countries can take all the vaccines for their own populations. Now, I must say that in those 170 countries is not present China and is not present the United States. So I don't want to oversell the idea that we've got to this magical global agreement, but it shows that there is still the possibility to have global agreements on these really important social issues. But in the world that we live in and the forces that we are contending with geopolitically, it's hard to do, but it can be done, as COVAX is showing us.
Thank you, Ro. It's very affirming that although there is a long road ahead, to have folks such as yourself who are having these conversations and working on efforts to really help us solve for what is ahead. So this wraps our conversation for today. Kate, Behncken, and Rohitesh, Dhawan, I want to thank you both again for joining us for this hour. A note to our viewers, you can find more articles and video about the topic we discussed today and many other global themes at gzeromedia.com/ UNGA. And GZERO Media has one more live stream coming up next week. So join the team on October 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern as they bring you a conversation about digital peace and cybersecurity. Again, I'm Sherrell Dorsey, founder and CEO of The Plug, a digital news and insights publication covering the Black innovation economy. Thank you all for watching and take good care.